My name is Giacomo Persipaoli. I'm the head of the Security and Technology Program at UNIDIR, the UN Institute for Disarmament Research. And I'm joined today by my colleague, Beyza Unal. Beyza, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. My name is Beyza Unal. I'm the head of Science, Technology, and International Security Unit at UN Office for Disarmament Affairs, UNODA. Thanks, Giacomo.
Thanks, Beyza. It is truly my pleasure to welcome you to this fourth briefing of this series on AI in the military domain. These regional briefings are part of UNIDIR's wider effort to support all states in their informed participation to multilateral disarmament processes. We had briefings on different topics earlier this year, and for this last series, we decided to focus on the topic of artificial intelligence, which in the last 12 months, and in particular in the last 6 months, has really gained a lot of traction at the multilateral level. So if I can ask my colleague Jessica to please share the slides. We will have about 25 minutes where Beyza and myself will be briefing you. And then for the second half of this hour, there is plenty of time for you to ask any questions. You can do so in the chat throughout the presentation, or you can wait for the end and ask to unmute yourself and ask the question directly. So the topic of today is security and technology, of course, AI in the military domain. This is the agenda that we will follow. Next slide, please. First and foremost, we thought of trying to offer a definition, or at least a working definition of what we mean with artificial intelligence in the military domain. There is no universally accepted definition. There is no process that has been mandated to come up with such a definition, but we think nevertheless that it's important to have a working level definition that can help us scope the issue better. We will then provide a little bit of context into what kind of debates, what kind of initiatives have been have started in pertaining to AI in the military domain over the last 12 months or so. And all of this will provide the context and the framing around the briefing, the detailed briefing that Beyza will give to all of us on draft resolution L43 that was adopted by the first committee just a few weeks ago on the topic of AI in the military domain. And as I mentioned, there will be ample time for Q&A. Next slide, please. So what do we mean with AI in the military domain? We can probably group or split this concept into two categories. And again, these are not written anywhere. These are just working definitions. The first category pertains to AI used by military forces during military operations. And the label of military operations is quite general by design because they refer to a very wide range of operations that military forces can be involved in, from the conduct of war, so warfare and conflict, to a long list of operations that, depending on where you are in the world, military forces can be involved in support of law enforcement, for example, to combat organized crime, to reinforce border security, to conduct counter-piracy operations, to conduct disaster or humanitarian relief. So a wide range of non-combat specific operations that still involve the use of military forces and military equipment. The range of tasks that are part of this category you see on the slide can include command and control, and in general, operational planning, targeting, where appropriate, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, AI as an enabler of more sophisticated autonomous systems, and these systems can be weapon systems or can be non-weapon systems, but still uncrewed systems that are made more sophisticated and smarter with the use of artificial intelligence. And the last point of battlefield management, including logistics, this refers to all of the decisions and all of the practices that have to be put in place in order to be able to sustain the presence and the operations of military forces on the ground for a sustained period of time. Now, a second category, it's a category that it's up to you to decide the extent to which it is relevant to this discussion, but I think it's still important to flag it. Military forces have many requirements that are similar to other big organizations and big entities, and they may find artificial intelligence to be very useful in improving efficiencies and productivity in the execution of these tasks. Force management, so anything that has to do with management of people, of their medical situation, financial management of military forces, equipment management, so anything from predictive maintenance to acquisition and making sure that all of the kind of equipment management processes are as efficient as possible to ensure that when equipment is needed, equipment is available. Training is a big element there. It could be considered as being a subset of force management, but because AI has been so openly discussed as a really powerful technology to unlock a new level of sophisticated training capabilities, we thought it would be worth highlighting. And last but not least, for those military forces that have in-house research and development capability, of course, in the same way in which AI is supporting scientific research and development in the civilian context, it can do the same in the military one. Next slide, please. So what about the general context around which international discussions have been happening on the topic of AI in the military domain? Fundamentally, you see here like two layers. The top row really focuses on multilateral efforts or outcomes of multilateral initiatives. Starting with the new Agenda for Peace, the Pact for the Future, the report of the Secretary General high-level advisory body on AI that does include a box or some specific information on the military domain. The UN Group of Governmental Experts on Lethal Autonomous Weapon Systems, that is part of the Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons, which has been the forum within which discussions on autonomy have been held for the past 10 or more years. The General Assembly, which of course is within the first committee, it's already the second year in a row that a resolution on autonomous weapon systems has been adopted. But historically, this is also the first year that we have a first committee resolution that focuses on AI in the military domain more broadly. And this is the resolution that Besa is going to present very shortly. The second row refers to initiatives that are not multilateral, in the sense that they're not universal, they're not being led and managed within the UN kind of a ecosystem, but they're still very pertinent, not only from a subject perspective, but also because both the re-aim, so the responsible AI in the military domain process, as well as the political declaration on responsible military use of artificial intelligence and autonomy, both of these initiatives, while they started as a national-led or a nationally championed initiatives, they now count roughly 60 states that endorse each one of these. The re-aim process was championed by the Netherlands, and in 2023, in February 2023, the Netherlands hosted the first summit on responsible AI in the military domain, which produced a call to action, which was then kind of taken up by the Republic of Korea that hosted in September this year the second summit on REAIM and produced the blueprint for action, which is kind of a natural follow-on outcome document. What is interesting about the REAIM process is that while it has states at its core, it is also by design a multi-stakeholder process. So the call to action first and the blueprint to action now are not only for states. Those are actions that can be and should be implemented by the wide range of stakeholders that are involved. And this is different from the political declaration that instead was launched again in February 2023 by the United States. And since then, it has expanded to count now roughly 60 states as endorsing states, which instead focuses more on designing or implementing a set of rules and norms of responsible state behavior in the development and deployment of military applications of AI. Next slide, please. Just to pick three of these documents more precisely, starting with the new Agenda for Peace, that is also the quote-unquote oldest, being released in July last year. We see that Secretary General, in addition to urge states to develop national strategies on responsible design, development, and use of AI, it also called for states to develop norms, rules, and principles around the design, development, and use of military applications of artificial intelligence. And for us, this is important because the Secretary General has been traditionally a very strong advocate for regulation of lethal autonomous weapon systems. But this is also, this new Agenda for Peace, and in particular, these paragraphs, showcase how the discussions on AI more broadly in military applications of AI have reached a point that they deserve to have their own dedicated discussions that go beyond lethal autonomous weapon systems. Next slide, please. This is the Pact for the Future. I'm sure those of you that are from the MFA are familiar with this because you all negotiated it and adopted it in late September of this year. It's a much broader document with broader scope, so the language is, as a result, a little bit more diluted. Nevertheless, under Action 27, when we speak about seizing the opportunities associated with new and emerging tech and address potential risks posed by their misuse, there is a commitment that states made to continue assessing existing and potential risks associated with military applications of AI, as well as the possible opportunities that may emerge throughout their life cycle in consultation with relevant stakeholders. I think here there are two elements worth highlighting. One is the importance of stakeholders' engagement. Clearly, states are the primary regulators and norm builders, but they do need to consult with relevant stakeholders because that's where the technical and the more sophisticated knowledge resides. And also the explicit call on the life cycle approach. It's something that is important because when we're talking about AI in the military domain, there is often the tendency to focus on the use of AI, because that's where potentially things can go wrong, more easily identifiable. However, when it is important that when we're considering responsible development of military applications of AI and potential risk management or risk mitigation, we look at the whole life cycle. And last point that I wanted to make before giving the floor to Beza, next slide, please. It's really focusing on the outcome document of the second Responsible AI in the Military Domain Summit held in Seoul in September. It produced a blueprint for action. It's relatively short. It's only 2 or 3 pages long, but it's a very rich document that I do invite you to consult. I've only extracted the paragraphs that are phrased as commitments, but there is much more in this document that I believe will be useful for you to look at. In particular, I would like to draw your attention not only to the explicit statement of the need to continue discussing this topic at the international, national, and regional level with the involvement of stakeholders, as well as the meaningful engagement of youth. AI is a technology of the future, and it is paramount that youth and the new generation is included in this discussion. But paragraph 16, there is a strong commitment to strengthening international cooperation on capacity building aimed at reducing the knowledge gap on responsible development, deployment, and use of AI in the military domain. We think that this paragraph is particularly important because often when we see discussions on capacity building associated with artificial intelligence, they tend to focus primarily on technology transfer and making sure that states have all equal opportunities to access the technology. And that is clearly an important component of capacity building, but it's not the only one. In order for the technology, once it is accessed, to be able to be used and deployed in a responsible way that is compliant with existing rules and laws and regulations and ethical norms, it is important that there is an organizational and institutional knowledge and readiness to be able to absorb this technology appropriately. So it is really important that there is a strong focus and emphasis on knowledge building before technology transfer. And I'm now going to give the floor to Beza, who is going to present on the resolution that was just adopted by the first committee. Beza, over to you.
Thank you. Thanks, Giacomo. Next slide, please. So a new resolution has been adopted by the first committee. And that resolution does not yet have a symbol in the UN system, so we call it L43 as a draft resolution, because it needs to pass the budgetary committee, and the General Assembly needs to adopt it by the end of this month. But I'm going to talk about what this resolution covers. First of all, the resolution indicates directly and recognizes the value of inclusive multilateral exchange of views on AI in the military domain and its implications for international peace and security. It has been co-sponsored by 22 member states. It's the first AI resolution looking at military applications of its kind within the first committee, and it is adopted by a vote as a whole of 165 states being in favor of it. This is quite a high number, actually, when you look at the first committee resolutions. Next slide, please. Now, let me talk a little bit about the resolution language. If you look at the preambular paragraphs of the resolution underlines multiple factors. One of that is that it clearly states that this resolution does not cover AI in the civilian domain, which means that it asks member states to look at military applications of artificial intelligence, as well as AI applications that have impacts to international peace and security. The resolution also focuses and states that it focuses on the whole life cycle of AI capabilities in the military domain. And there had been several discussions actually within the UN. What is actually a whole life cycle of AI capabilities? What does that mean? What do we mean by a life cycle? And the resolution explains that clearly. It says that it's looking at any AI systems or models that could be thought of in the pre-design stage, to the design stage, to the development stage, and then evaluation and testing of those models or systems for military uses, as well as deployment of them, for instance, in the battlefield, and use of them, as well. And then sale and procurement of such systems, as well as operation and decommissioning phase of it. So it's a whole life cycle approach, indicating that the risks do not only come from the use itself, but also when you are designing or developing or throughout the life cycle, there are certain risks that states should consider. The resolution also talks about certain applications in the military domain when it comes to AI, and those are listed as AI's integration into weapons themselves, and then AI's integration into weapon systems, as well as AI being used as a mean or method of warfare. This is a language that resonates with legal reviews of new weapons, means, and methods of warfare. It's a terminology, as well as it talks about AI being a support system for military operations. The resolution also indicates that it's not only looking at risks of artificial intelligence, but that there are certain opportunities that AI could bring to the military domain. So it acknowledges both opportunities and risks side. And then in terms of impact, it broadly touches on several areas where impact is either potential or already existing. And those areas including arms control, disarmament, and non-proliferation at large, as well as international security and stability related questions that may arise from integration of AI in the battlefield or in conflict in general, as well as risks of arms race, miscalculation, escalatory risks that could lead to conflict, as well as gender, racial, age, and social aspects. Next slide, please. Now, if we look at the resolution, the mandate, if you look at the mandate of the resolution, there are multiple operating paragraphs, and the most important operating paragraphs are for the member states are operating paragraph 7 and 8, OP7 and 8. For OP7, what the resolution asks is that it requests the Secretary General to seek the views of member states and observer states on opportunities and challenges posed by artificial intelligence in the international peace and security. So we're looking, as the Secretariat, we're looking at member states' views on opportunities and risks and challenges when it comes to AI in the military domain. The second part, that is requested by the Secretary General, is to summarize the views of these member states and also catalog existing and emerging normative proposals. So when you are submitting as member states your views to the Secretariat, we would be also interested in receiving inputs about what type of existing and emerging normative proposals that member states see in this area. The second part of this mandate is also requesting the Secretary General to invite the views of other stakeholders. That includes, and the resolution indicates that clearly, of international and regional organizations, civil society, industry, as well as scientific communities, and ICRC is part of that as well. And we are asked to capture those views in original language received in the report. We'll be publishing the member states' views, both in the original language received, but also translated into all 6 UN languages. But we will only publish the views of the stakeholders in the original language received. So it would be really important, I think, for the member states, not only to submit their views, but also if you have stakeholders in your countries or in the region that you think that the Secretariat would benefit or the member states would benefit of their views, then please also encourage them to submit those views to us as well. Next slide. Now, what are the elements that member states could consider in terms of their submissions? opportunities and risks, as I just mentioned, is the particular aim of this resolution. It asks clearly, and under the opportunities and risks, I think, and linked to that is the impacts to international peace and security. So in your views, you could mention what type of impacts that arise from AI use or development and so on to peace and security. And then capacity building, what type of capacity building activities exist or what is needed? What do we mean by capacity building and international cooperation when it comes to military applications? All of those would be relevant. And then another element I think linked to this is really sharing of good practices, lessons learned. And every country has their own good practices. It would be good for the Secretariat to collect those and understand what already exists and give and provide that input back to the member states as a whole, so that everyone could benefit from those practices. And there could be regional good practices as well that member states may want to share with the Secretariat. The other element is really about the role of the multi-stakeholder community when it comes to the development of artificial intelligence. How does your country, how does your region view that? And then existing dialogue at national, regional, sub-regional, and global levels could be another element of consideration for member states' views. And lastly, I think, which would be crucial to understand is, what do you think as the next step in terms of existing and emerging normative proposals when it comes to military applications of artificial intelligence? Next slide, please. Now, in terms of expected next steps, the resolution will be considered for adoption in the General Assembly, as I mentioned, in late December. And once it's adopted, what will happen in the new year is that the Secretariat, we will send a note verbal to member states and observer states, as well as other stakeholders, the ones that I mentioned, indicating that this resolution is adopted, and we will request your views. We will give you a deadline of when those views needs to be submitted. So we will send that note verbal in early January, probably in 2025. And then we're going to collect those views, and a substantive report will be drafted based on those views. And after the report is drafted, it goes through a whole internal process within the UN, and then it will be published before the 80th session of the first committee, which will hopefully then provide some views of the Secretary General on the topic, as well as views of the member states on the topic, which might provide inputs into the next stages, whether the co-sponsors would want to go ahead and provide and put a new resolution or not. So those are the elements from the resolution. I'll now turn to Giacomo for the closing up of the session. Thanks.
Thanks, Beyza. And just following up on the process-related next steps, here are some additional points you may want to consider as you are preparing yourself to submit the national view. First, we do recommend that you review the wealth of knowledge and resources that already exist on the topic of artificial intelligence in the military domain beyond weapon systems. ODA has written a recent paper about it. UNIDIR has done the same multiple times over the last couple of years. And in addition to our own organizations, there are many academic institutes that have looked at this topic at length and depth. And while AI in the military domain beyond weapon systems might seem a relatively new topic for states that instead have focused primarily on autonomous weapon systems until now, in the broader academic community, there is already a strong evidence that you can find. We would also suggest that you review the documents and the frameworks that I mentioned at the very beginning of this presentation that are produced by international or multilateral organizations to really understand the current thinking on the subject of AI in the military domain. You don't necessarily have to agree or identify yourselves with the messages that are included, but I think nevertheless it would be useful for you to have a general framing and understanding on the topics. Something that we recommend that you consider based on our analysis of previous analyses that we've conducted to try to understand what are some of the good practices that exist when it comes to the preparation of national views on whichever topic. One thing that emerged that's consistent is the need to conduct sufficient or to dedicate sufficient time to internal consultations with all relevant national stakeholders, both within the government and outside of the government. Within the government, given the topic of AI in the military domain, clearly there is a case for the foreign affairs colleagues to engage with the defense or national security ecosystem to collect their views as well. Outside of the government, this may include anything from private sector and technology developers, civil society organizations, academic experts, international lawyers, etc. The point here is not to dilute the importance of governments in designing their own views, absolutely not, but it's really to make sure that these views are taken into account and are informed by the broadest possible range of perspectives that are relevant. Make sure that when you do consolidate your national view, you do so focusing on areas other than lethal autonomous weapon systems, not because these systems are not important, they most certainly are, but they already have their dedicated channel for discussion and negotiation. So really try to the extent that you can to take this opportunity to really discuss elements that go beyond weapon systems. And the last bullet is, it comes from UNIDIR and not from ODA for a reason, because this is just an educated guess based on previous processes that have followed a similar sequence of events or schedule of events. We believe that a reasonable timeline for the submission of these views, it's going to be around April, can be beginning of April, end of April. We don't know that yet, but it would be important for you to keep in mind that even if the next first committee is 10 months away, the deadline is going to be much shorter because these documents have to be, not only the analysis has to be produced by colleagues at the Secretariat, but then there are also all of the kind of operational times for translations, etc. So with that, I also would like to take the opportunity to flag that as of 2025, UNIDIR will be organizing a new annual conference on AI security and ethics. And because of this resolution, we have decided that for 2025, this conference will take place on the 27th and 28th of March in Geneva, 2025, of course. And the intent of holding this conference in March is, again, to provide yet another avenue through which states can refine or acquire the knowledge that they need in order to develop their national view on this very important topic. And with that, I thank you for your attention, and I also thank the interpreters for their support.